Hello and welcome to our Passion for Moms webinar series, Mothers Are Leaders. We have been doing a motherhood series about leadership, the role that moms are as leaders in our communities and our families. And I am thrilled to have Jeannie McGinnis with us today. And she is actually joining us live from England. So we are going to dive in and talk about her personal account and experience that she and her family had with COVID-19 and the coronavirus. So Jeannie, welcome to our webinar series with Passion for Moms.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about who you are, how you landed in England?
Well, so I've been in England for about 15 years with my husband and my two kids. We came over when they were 3 months old and 2 years old. So we are all Americans, but now we're also American Brits because we got our British passports a few years ago. And we love England. We definitely consider this home, though half my family would say be in Texas and North Carolina. A lot of friends, old friends over there too. We came over originally because we were in full-time ministry, and my husband also is an academic, and so he got an opportunity for a scholarship here in Sheffield for master's and PhD, which was really an honor. And then also we were helping lead a church, and so for about 8 years here in Sheffield, we were both lead pastors. I worked with my husband and kind of with the kids and in and out and that kind of thing too, but leading a church, seeing a church birth here in postmodern, non-Bible Belt, of course, England, and love it, love the people. In the middle of that, the church was thriving, we really sensed we were supposed to kind of pursue other things, especially with my husband and academic work. But I personally, I love full-time ministry, took a sabbatical and felt really like God was saying, your job is outside the church. You have a whole platform outside the church. And I really hadn't thought about that. My background is journalism and presenting. And I had also worked in a hospital and done a lot of work, just writing articles and newsletters for a hospital. So I had a bit of a wellness background. And long story short, I'm not going to get into it, but today, and that was back in 2013. So today, 7 years later, I had a portfolio career in media, health, and wellness. And so I actually do everything from TV presenting, stage presenting, like fashion shows. I do voiceovers. I do commercial modeling. When I say that, it's like the mom on the sofa drinking tea saying, look at the sofa, that kind of thing. So I'm the redhead mom in some adverts and stuff like that. And then I also have a whole passion for health and wellness. And so I'm certified in various things, nutrition, aromatherapy, and all of that. And I actually am the skincare and beauty trainer for a global wellness brand for the UK and Ireland.
So before we move on, because I know that we definitely want to hear your story and what you experienced with COVID, but I also don't want to miss the opportunity just to, one of the things that we're doing with these Passion for Moms webinar series is really highlighting the opportunity that we as mothers get to make in the world around us, and how God gives us so many different unique platforms to use our voice and to use the opportunity for leadership. So you mentioned about how you transitioned out of ministry, full-time ministry, into a very secular audience with TV and media and health and wellness. And so what has that looked like for you, Jeannie, to be able to be a light in a very dark world? And has that been an opportunity that God has been able to use to be a leader?
Yes. First of all, I love it. I think this is where Jesus hung out. In fact, as a family, we're watching The Chosen. If you haven't watched it, it's amazing, actually, and how it, portrays Jesus. And I think that's who he hung out with, because he could talk and relate and be. And I think what's happened, well, it's funny, in an almost funny way. when I used to introduce myself as a pastor or pastor's wife here in England, people would either be like, oh, that's really interesting, or they'd be like, wouldn't know what to say, or be a little awkward, or like, oh, wow, that's great if they were a Christian. It's the same as when I said, oh, well, I do modeling. I got the same reactions, which is really interesting. But one is nothing is your identity except for Jesus. Nothing, no matter what you do. Two is all the people I meet. I love it. I'm an introvert actually, but the thing is in all these avenues, I get to meet a lot of people and spend, like a makeup artist, I spent hours with a makeup artist, or being on a set and a film crew, you just get to be light in the darkness and how you respond to things, how you talk about things. I mean, I've had powerful conversations because I also have done a lot of volunteer work. For several years, I worked with women who were rescued from human trafficking.
Oh,
so
wow.
people say, so what do you do, besides this? I'd be like, well, I work with women rescued from human trafficking. What do you say to that? And I get to be, it's old saying, but Jesus was skin on in those kind of situations, but you get to do that in the middle of a car when you're driving for 2 hours to shoot, and talking about social justice. And so for me, it's really been really life-giving, and I've loved it. And I never thought, I loved full-time ministry, but I feel like this is full-time ministry in a whole different way. And so, and I think it's interesting, even I have a daughter and a son. My daughter is 17, my son is 15. And even like things like people are like, oh, you do modeling. I'm like, oh my gosh, my daughter gets to see that this is just the real people. These are now, I have friends you see on billboards, and I'm like, I know the reality. I know where they struggle. We talk, we share. We're having a cup of tea, we're waiting for the makeup artist, and they're just real people with problems. They look pretty on the outside, but on the inside, everybody hurts. Everybody has pain. And so it's great to be able to talk to my daughter about that, to where, she can look at a magazine and be like, meh, whatever, because that's not real, and yeah.
And I think that's such a great reminder for us as women and as moms, for us personally in our identity, as well as we are speaking life and truth into our children, of recognizing that the shell that holds beauty is
fades.
Yes, it fades. And just recognizing that the character of who we are really defines us, and that oftentimes we can be drawn to that glamour and beauty, and yet recognizing that everybody is broken, everybody is hurting, and everybody is in need of a savior. And so just being able to be real with our kids, that that we can't just look to the outside of someone. We really need to be intentional to get to know the heart of every person, and how we have an opportunity to minister and share life with those, and not to be intimidated, but to be purposeful in those conversations. So I love that. I love that you have that platform to be a light and a leader in the realm that God's given you. What an amazing gift and opportunity.
Yeah, it really is. It is.
And I think that leads us actually into a really amazing transition, because as we know, we are in the middle of a global pandemic. This pandemic has not just been in Europe and England where you are. It's not just been in the US where I am, but it's been something that the whole world has come face to face with and encountered. And just a minute ago, you mentioned something about being a light and being an opportunity to be a voice to those around you. And I think that this pandemic allows us to be a light and a voice in a place that is controlled and consumed by so much fear. So there's a couple things. I want to know your personal journey, but then I also want to be able to dive in to what that has looked like personally, of how you've had the opportunity to share Jesus and to be a light in a very unique time in history. You know, this pandemic is something that our grandkids and great grandkids are going to read about in history, because we're living history. So why don't we just start at the beginning and tell us what your first encounter with COVID-19 looked like, maybe if it was just hitting your community, and so maybe some of the things that you experienced as a family as it began to infiltrate England and where you live, and then how then your family came down with the coronavirus and just kind of what that looked like, because I know you kept a very daily journal and diary of your experience, but give us kind of that big picture and start walking us through that process.
Okay. Well, when we started 2020, who knew, right? And in fact, I was getting certified to teach mindfulness. And I have a vision board I do every year. And on my vision board, I put the word breathe. I've got mom, because I like the word mom. I'm going to breathe 3 times, right? So here I was in the middle of all this. And then my son, who's 15, I have a 15-year-old and 17-year-old. My son went to Italy in February, where a lot of kids were going with a school trip. And they were coming back, and all of a sudden we started hearing these reports in Italy. There was this crazy virus, and a little bit of caution. That's kind of weird. This is mid-February. So it starts to progress, and we get more and more reports, and Spain, Italy start shutting down a bit. And it's like this trickle effect, and it was just weird. So we're all just kind of watching this going, what? We have never experienced this in our lives. Nobody knew what it was really, or what kind of symptoms. The typical was cough, fever, maybe some aches and pains, maybe a bit of chest pain. That was typical. Now, later on, I've learned there's about 127 symptoms that people can have, because it can hit any organ. And there's,
Wow.
There's a lot. I know more about COVID than you ever want to know, but I'll tell you why later. So those were the ones we kind of heard about, but our government was just trying to figure out what to do. And, honestly, I just hate to be in that position. I would not want to have to figure out what to do with an entire nation. It's just a terrible decision to have to make. And so, anyhow, so then I guess it was about, we were getting first week of March, and, life was normal, but we're like hearing things and wondering what's going to happen, not really knowing. We had this trip to Portugal planned for a holiday in April. We're like, oh, maybe that will be affected. Maybe not. We don't know, who knew? And then about around March 10th, my son had his birthday. He was turning 15, and he went to his party, and he came back, and the next morning, it was a Monday morning, he woke up and he's like, Mom, I don't feel good. Got the aches, just kind of, just sort of that kind of normal kid doesn't feel good sort of thing, not like bad. And I was like, well, let's keep you home. But we still didn't have anything from school, like stay home. It was very much like, take some Tylenol or paracetamol, as we call it here, and you'll feel better. So, but then
was that a first response of thinking it could be COVID at that time, or were you just thinking it could just be any kind of kid?
Oh, like any kind of virus at that point.
Okay.
Like normal, we all get the same cold kind of virus, okay. The family, we love to share this thing. So yeah. So he comes down with this, and I get concerned because I'm like, well, he was in Italy, but it was like Northern Italy versus Southern Italy. So I start calling to try to get testing. He doesn't fit the criteria, but he's not really that sick, honestly. So he starts to kind of feel better. We actually send him to school because we didn't have any protocol or anything like that. He's like, Mom, I'm not feeling all that great. So he comes back home, but it's still a bit of mild aches. Honestly, that's about it. Maybe a bit of a sore throat, not even a cough. So then Friday the 13th, which I don't believe in curses or anything, bless that day. But Friday 13th, I wake up and I'm like, I'm achy, just kind of feeling a little funky here, So I call in because I work also at a city center office. I call in, I'm like, I don't think I should come in. Over the weekend though, the government starts saying, hey, we're going to start self-isolating if you have these symptoms. So it was all brand new. And we're like, okay. But so I try to get testing. If over the process of 2 weeks, I actually tried about 8 times for our whole family and couldn't get it because it was inaccessible until about May, honestly, for us. So It's like, and really one key is if you come down with symptoms within the first 3 to 5 days, really is when you can get accurate testing. After that, you can get a lot of false negatives. So that's just a little key if you start to feel a little funky. And that's really all it was at first. It was just like normal, not even flu-y, just sort of, My husband started to feel it on Sunday. So I was Friday, he was Sunday. We all kind of felt like had a little bit of chest pain, almost like heartburn. And then they continue, you know, a little bit of fever, not terrible, didn't feel great. By Monday, they said, if your family has it, you need to quarantine. So my daughter was like, I don't have it, but I'll stay home. She was excited to stay home. And so we were quarantined strictly for 2 weeks. But within that 2 weeks, they actually shut down England. So schools closed, everything. So in that time, my daughter, who's 17, who always gets the cold first, never got any symptoms, which is bizarre. My son stayed mild. He felt achy, headachy, you know, but it wasn't terrible. My husband, the same. I was like that until day 9. On day 9, yeah. And usually between day 5 and 14 is when it can turn nasty. And cytokine overload, all kinds of stuff can happen. This is when people go into the ICU, all that, just because your body starts really fighting it. So around day 9, my breathing changed like significantly. I started sounding like Darth Vader with a wheeze, you know, and just a lot more labored. And I've never had asthma, but I was demonstrating asthma to the point where throughout the day, it was like I was upstairs and wheezing. I was talking, calling down to him because it was so loud and, you know, pronounced, and I was just struggling to breathe. We ended up that night calling the paramedics, and we had called the doctor multiple times, and they're like, take Tylenol, you know, there's not much you can do, you know, but when the breathing changed, it got really scary. And so I just remember sitting there, my husband trying to talk to me while he's talking to, we call it 111 or 999 here, talking to 999. We're waiting for 2 paramedics to come because he had called twice because I was starting to really not be able to breathe. My son, who is not a touchy-feely kid, reaches over, holds my hand. He's like, Mom, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I'm like, all right. You know, and I'm just trying to hold it together, trying to breathe, you know, and paramedics came. They were lovely, full garb. And they're like, yep, this is happening. We're in full pandemic. If you can not go to the hospital, we recommend it. My oxygen was right, was okay, despite my breathing. And they were able to give me inhalers and steroids. But basically, because of pandemic, we were getting overload in hospitals, and it was pretty dire. And having heard stories in the hospitals, people were being turned away, you know, yeah, it was just pretty awful. So, yeah, so at that point, I mean, that's when my husband sent out, you know, we sent out prayer letters, and it was pretty intense. Day 9 to 14, I had a high fever. I mean, like I said, it had switched. But here's what's interesting. So I'm waking up at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and now in our support groups, we call it the COVID strangle. But you get this feeling like you wake up choking, like someone's strangling you. And we don't know if it's like a sleep apnea, acid reflux, funky, we don't know what it is. But that's what it feels like, is a pressure on your chest and then someone choking you. So I would wake up like gasping for air. And the only way to calm it down is really to sit and be quiet and breathe, right? So all that meditation that I learned, all that mindfulness, you know, I've got to breathe. I just have to sit and get grounded and get peace. And, you know, for me, I've learned secular mindfulness, but I can apply my Christian faith and be like, God, I invite this peace, because I cannot let fear overtake me, because fear never helps. Fear never, ever helps. It doesn't help the immune system. Anxiety doesn't help the immune system. So I made a choice. I remember it was around day 9, 10, or 11. I'm up at 2 in the morning again, can't breathe, trying to stay peaceful. And I was like, God, I'm not going to ask why, because you know what? This is just going to be a spiral. If I go, why me? Why my family? It's just fruitless. But it was God, what do you want to do in the middle of this? You know, what do you want? You know, I need your peace. I need your presence, but what do you want to do? And even then, and I'll be vulnerable, but I really have seen this kind of, I felt like, I felt like God said, you're going to be a flagship. And I was like, what's a flagship? I had to look it up, right? I'm a journalist, look it up, you know, because I think flagship department store, whatever, but really a flagship, and I've done a lot of study, is someone who's in the battle and in a war, but has won a battle. And they usually have the victory flag, and they usually are leading other ships. It doesn't make them any better. It just means that they've had victory in this war. And I felt like God gave me a vision, like your attitude, how you approach this, everything, you know, is going to give you those flags of victory, you know. And honestly, it gave me vision for this really crappy thing that happened to me. You know, I'm like, who wants to be in this club? Nobody, you know. And sure, pray for protection, amen, you know. But if you look at suffering in the New Testament, the disciples were thrown in jail. You know, they went through all kinds of crud. You know, we are not promised no suffering, but we are promised His presence. Right. And I think that's the only thing we can get, you know, and not to give in to fear, even though there are scary times. And it's okay to acknowledge, you know, I'm really scared. I can't breathe right now. I just really am, you know. And so really learning over and over, and breathing exercises were key, all sorts for my lungs. So I did a lot. I mean, I feel like I have Olympic lungs, sort of. They're still healing, but yeah, it was pretty scary. So later, a few days later, after day 14, I actually got a secondary infection. We were able to get antibiotics for that. And honestly, I just wasn't improving. Maybe a tiny bit every week, but you know, I think one of the hard questions, and I would say if you know people with COVID, the lingering symptoms, I think one of the hard questions was, feeling better yet? I'm like, no, I don't like that question. I say, checking in with you, you know, how's today? But I found that question was really hard because 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks passed. And I'm like, wow, I'm still struggling. I'm on steroids to keep my lungs open. I can barely walk, you know, and function. And I was healthy pre-COVID. I had none of the risks, you know, and I think that's something else to note is we just don't know. And there is becoming more and more percentage, you know, I've heard up to 1/3 of people who get it can have lingering symptoms. And, you know, we just don't understand this at all. And so anyhow, yeah, so I continued probably around, I guess it was about 40 days in, I was like, I need some support. This is so funky. My family had recovered after 3 weeks. In fact, about a month later, my son and husband were able to run about 10K, which is great. Wow. My daughter never got it. However, she did about 6 weeks later, got horrible mouth sores. And that is actually one of the things that you can get. My son got a weird rash as well. Those are also lingering things you can get. So I do believe my daughter had something, you know, but she never showed symptoms, which I'm grateful for. And I think showing our family shows you what can happen, you know, you just don't know. So, yeah, but about 40 days in, I actually found a Facebook group for people called long haulers. There's only about 200 of us at the time. This is, you know, beginning of April. And these are over a month, you know. This group now has 2 groups, which is about 8,000 people. We now have a UK group that I'm also a part of that has about 2,500. And these are people who are now like 80 plus days and longer. And I'm doing great compared to some of them. So I'm, wow, you know, yeah, I'm actually helping. I see this as my volunteer work right now, is I'm actually helping admin both of them and doing a lot of behind the scenes and doing some amazing stuff about awareness and helping each other, even though I'm still in my recovery process as well. I'm on day 138 as of today. I had laryngitis straight for 11 weeks. Actually had a scope done, and I don't have any damage in my throat, which is great, but I will, like, I'm starting to get raspy now, and this is actually for my lungs. So we're still in the process of my, I'm going to see a pulmonary specialist because my lungs, I still can't do anything, you know, like exercise because my lungs will constrict, or even talking a lot or walking. It will constrict and it impacts my throat. And so I'm still believing for healing, and I've had lots and lots of prayer for healing. Believe for 100%. I'm just not there yet. I think I would say a few wonderful things that happened along the way that I really appreciate. So if there's anybody listening and you know people with COVID, like I appreciate all these sweet, and I call it balm like prayers, just those really sweet, because you're so sick, you know, and you just experience that. And people left me, I couldn't talk. And so people are like, can I pray for you? I'm like, I can't talk. So they're like, well, we'll send a voice message. But honestly, at 2 a.m, when you're so sick and you hear a voice message of beautiful prayers over you, it's just so powerful, you know. Then I had Christians and non-Christians. I mean, we were quarantined actually for 3 weeks straight. And our family couldn't go out. We couldn't get prescriptions. We couldn't get groceries. So we had people drop stuff off, you know, do errands for us. I was so impacted, you know, and about the kindness of people, and non-Christians and Christians, neighbors. Like the sweet little Catholic neighbor was like writing me notes, you know. I'm like, who knew? Love you, you know, anything. She's like, I will go to the store and get you anything, you know. And I felt so loved and encouraged, you know. And then people send me encouragements, and I needed it. Honestly, I'd be there, you know, like I said, I woke up in the night probably for about 8 weeks straight because I couldn't breathe, you know. And so, but I never lost hope. I had emotional wobbles, as we call them, some big ones, actually, because I have an incredible support system, incredible. I'm actually a certified coach. I've done lay counseling with others, trauma counseling, and I needed counseling. I still do, you know, because I had some PTSD, honestly, from the experiences, and trauma triggers trauma. So it's like any funky thing is going to come up, you know, because you're emotional, you're tired. We're in lockdown. Everybody's had the lockdown lows. Imagine being sick in the midst of it too, you know? And so I've been so grateful for emotional support, and it's helped me process, you know, just the stress and having something that's now sort of chronic, you know. I wouldn't say this is going to be forever, but it is chronic right now, you know, going into 21 weeks on Friday, you know, just not being able to have full vitality. And so, yeah, that's kind of been a little bit about our story. Like I said, my family, you know, did get over it, and I'm grateful, you know, but who knew?
Do you have any advice for, and I know that you can only speak from your personal experience, and that's all that I'm asking you to do, but do you have any advice just for those of us who are listening, of just wisdom in knowing how to be smart in this season with our families, and being intentional to know how to, in a minute we'll talk about how to care for others, but just for us as moms to be intentional to take care of our families. And because like you said, you didn't have any pre-existing conditions, and you know, you were just living life. And so just how to navigate maybe that, as far as just being in a season of being wise.
And I think that's exactly it. There's a lot of voices out there, and a lot of things trying to convince you, you know, and social media that will throw all kinds of things at you. And when I would say, be really cautious on what you put on social media, because what you think is great may hurt somebody else. And what's the fruit? Just FYI. Right. Also, just, I would say, and I liken this, I'm like, if a hurricane was coming to your city, you'd probably try to seek out, get perspective, maybe talk to someone who's kind of experiencing the hurricane and knows a little bit of, oh, it's not that bad of a storm. Oh, actually, it's a pretty bad storm, you know, maybe something like that. But you would do everything you would to prepare for that hurricane. And how would you keep your family safe, you know? But at the same time, we have access to a God who surpasses all understanding, who gives us that peace that surpasses all our questions, you know, and we really, really have to seek wisdom on that one. I think it's a challenge, because it's going to be a personal decision, whether it's school or it's going to that restaurant or, of just what is wisdom? How can I protect me? How can I protect you? I may be like my daughter, asymptomatic, but she probably could have spread it, and it's just like, who knew? Me, I didn't know how long I was contagious. So I actually stayed quarantined for 3 months straight because I had horrible symptoms, and so there's so many individual decisions, but you can't be ruled by fear. At the same time, I would err on the side of caution, because I think there can be on the other side, like, well, I have faith, and amen. Let's have faith, but let's have some wisdom here too, hurricane coming, I'm not going out in the hurricane. So I think it is an individual choice, but it's like, what are you being ruled by? What are you listening to? What voices are you listening to? Is it voices of wisdom? Is it voices of bigger than your own little small town or your city or your country? And I think that's one thing, is we're in a global pandemic.
Right.
And I appreciate that I have access to a lot of what I see in Europe and all that, and it's not just the US, I have friends but I am seeing a lot of stuff in the US. I'm like, people, it's global. Yeah. So I think there is something there where we need to spur each other on and love God, love our neighbor, but are we being loving in how we talk to each other? Is there fruit coming out of what we say? What kind of fruit is it? And then how can we love that person who might come down with COVID? I was so blessed, unbelievable, whether it's people online. I mean, I had people connect with me from all over the world. I had like my old best friend from high school, and this person and that person. And I'm like, wow, I just was and it helped me. It really did. It sustained me. And I feel like I had thousands of people praying for me. How much more can we do that for other people, And so I think for family, because it's about moms and kids, I think it's interesting. So my kids didn't get to grow up in the awesome with Vacation Bible School or like, the awesome youth group. Christians are we just don't have that many, and they don't have that many Christian friends. But we at least have created a home where, our ethos is we love Jesus and we want to love him as a family. And so, and it looks different with our kids. We've got introverted kids. And so even through all this, a couple of things that we did in our scary moments, and we had scary moments, is we would stop and we'd ask for peace, we'd ask for wisdom, and we'd be grateful. And you know what? In fact, there was a time I think my husband was like really bummed out and I was pretty low. And I said, I stopped. I could barely talk. I was like, what are we thankful for? What are we thankful for? Because it's like, get ourselves out. We need a bigger perspective, but I'm so proud of my kids who, and I'm like, I don't know what, it's the grace of God they're like this. I don't know what happened. It really is the grace of God. But like, they rose up and I couldn't cook at all. My husband doesn't cook very well, bless him, but gets a little deer in headlights. So my kids, amazing. I mean, every other night they rotated and I might say, okay, why don't you get this? I might have to write down what they could do. And then they would cook the meals for our family, and bring me tea and take care of me. And it wasn't a pleading and all that. It was like, Mom, how can I help you? And they did the cleaning. They weren't excited about the cleaning, but they did the cleaning. I still can't make the bed. My lungs flare up. I can't use cleaning supplies. It's too hard on my lungs. So we've, all these rhythms, they really stepped it up about 5 notches, in the middle of trauma. And I wouldn't say, we're family. We sometimes, had our interesting conversations at dinner, as my daughter puts it. But we forgive, we release, we bless, we play the gratefulness game, when we're struggling. We have a little jar right by our dinner table of like accomplishments and, how we celebrate each other, and we're Team McGinnis. And so, there's just so much that in trauma, I think what really is there shows up. What's your foundation? It will show up,
Right.
And including your faith, do you have authentic, real faith that's not full of crutches and things you have to rely on, because it's all going to get stripped away,
Right.
when you're hurting. So, yeah.
Well, and I think that that's one of the things that I think is a blessing in disguise, if you will, during this global pandemic, of recognizing that they're, like you said earlier, Christians are not immune to trials. It's almost like we think that being a Christian, we're exempt from walking through trials and tribulations, or, well, it's not going to touch us. And just recognizing the opportunity that we have to be a light through the midst of trials. But it's also what you indicated just now, is there's the preparation process that brings us to the place of being able to withstand the storms of life. And if that foundation isn't solid, the cracks are going to show. And it's, like building a house. If you don't have a solid foundation, it will fall. And so I like how you brought in the aspect that we should be intentional in building families with a strong foundation. And our kids aren't going to be perfect, but they should be able to withstand the storms if we've been doing the work of preparing them for the storm. And again, I think, we are such a blessed people that sometimes our kids may not recognize that trials are a lot of what is the reality of so much of the world.
Yeah.
And so just equipping them to be able to have a solid foundation, to know who and whose they are in Christ, and to rise to the occasion of serving. One of the things that I have a friend who actually their whole mantra is constantly, how can I serve you? What can I do for you today? And I think that that's just as we equip our kids to have a servant's heart and to have a sure foundation. Because again, like you said, this is a global pandemic. It's something that we all have an opportunity to contribute. And we have an opportunity to contribute in how we conduct ourselves. I like how you said we have an opportunity to contribute in how we have wisdom in knowing what we post or don't post online, and to be a light, but a light of encouragement and hope, to point people to Jesus during this very dark season that our world is experiencing. What would you say for those who are listening? And let me also just pause and say to our audience members, if you have any questions for Jeannie, there is a Q&A box down at the bottom, and you can type in those questions, and we'll try to save a little bit of time at the end to ask those questions. So feel free to ask questions if you have them for her. Jeannie, what would you say has been the biggest thing that you learned on the other side of this? Because, and I'll preface it with this, when you were talking about labored breathing at 2 a.m, I envisioned that being a very dark and lonely and scary time. And there's many people who, if you will, live that way during the daytime hours. They live in a constant place of fear. They live in a constant place of, honestly, physically and emotionally not being able to breathe because they're paralyzed by fear. You experienced that because of COVID, but what would you say came out of that season of, over 100 days of walking this journey? What's been that aha moment on the other side?
That is a great question.
Still learning.
Yeah, well, one, I'm still learning. 2 is that, wow, I'm so grateful I have foundation in me, because I don't know how I would have made it. And there's a lot of people who are really, really, really struggling. And I am so grateful that, like I said, I have a foundation of hearing God, making choices, because in our pain, it's hard to make choices, and I have made, like I said, I've made the choice of not why. I'm not going to go down that path. That is just not going to be productive for me. also made the choice. I think one great thing that I have come out the other side is part of this recovery process that we're finding in our support groups is we can't push on exercise and we can't push it on our daily living. We have to pace ourselves because a lot of people are having relapses. People who are training for marathons, we have athletes, we have ICU docs. I mean, we've got medical professional, all kinds, and a lot of us are type A, interesting, but you cannot be type A at all. You know, you've got to rest. And I think, you know, there is no coincidence that God was like, I want you to get certified in mindfulness and meditation before you know, I had no idea, but before I went into all this, because honestly, that stopping and breathing and pausing and being is really the thing that's the most healing and restorative, both with my lungs physically, but my spirit as I'm in trauma, you know. And I think coming out the other side, and I'm not quite on the other side yet, you know, I don't totally have that flag of victory, you know, I'm still in process, and that's okay. I am being patient with my body. I'm being patient with myself. I'm learning to be patient with everybody else, you know, because man, when we're squeezed, you just want to, you know, to everybody else. And that's not God either, you know. And it's just really, I think it's been great because I've been getting up freaking early, you know? So I'm getting like hours before the family gets up. And part of that's because it's been hard to breathe, but I've decided this is a really rich time. This is an incredibly rich time. And despite my illness, it is a gift for me. The illness was not a gift, but the time was, because I was so busy traveling and speaking and this thing and that thing. I didn't have time to just be. And I've had, you know, 21 weeks to just be, some of it quite painful, but to process, to hear God, to just have space. And honestly, this is how I want to be. And not get into that busy mode, because that's not fruitful over the long run. You know, I think we can have busy seasons, but I think I just really am enjoying this. And yeah, I think more and more gratitude has gone deeper and deeper, because I'm grateful to be alive. I really am. And especially when I'm in the support groups and we have people who've had heart attacks and lung clots like weeks later, you know, who were healthy pre-COVID. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm great. I'm so grateful. I'm so minor compared to some, you know. And yeah, and I think another exciting thing for me, you know, is I always just take the next step and go through the door. This is what happened when I was in full-time ministry and God said, time for you to go into the world. And I'm like, what? That was just not comfortable, you know. But all of a sudden I'm thrust in the limelight, or I'm doing commercials, or I'm like, what in the world am I doing here, you know? But it was like, just take the next step. Same here. God's saying, all right, I want you to, in the midst of your illness, help admin this little group that's now like thousands and thousands of people. I'm now in the behind the scenes with like helping, well, I can't go into it, but some stuff that will probably help internationally with awareness and resources. I've gotten to already do podcasts and lead podcasts as the interviewer for like top specialists in COVID. And I've been on the BBC a few times, you know, and several of the national news here as a case study. And I'm like, what happened? You know, it's because I just take the next step. And I really believe that as Christians, we can have God's favor on our life, wherever we're at, even if we're in jail. Like, you know, those guys, some of them had God's favor. Well, they all had God's favor, you know, but if God wants something to happen, it will happen, you know. And I think so I wouldn't say it's like I've learned that, but at the same time, it's been confirmed, even in this crazy time, you know. It's just take the next step and walk the way of peace, ask for wisdom. He'll show you. And I don't know.
Well,
I that answers.
No, I think that's great. And I think that a couple of things come to mind as you shared that, is just the recognition of a gratitude, but also a kindness of, you know, even in your own family, there is a variety of symptoms. You know, your daughter was asymptomatic. You are still having ongoing, lingering symptoms. And so for us to be very kind in this global pandemic, recognizing that we can't be dismissive. It's real, you know, it's a real virus. And so we have to be very kind and sensitive to how we respond to other people, recognizing that everybody's stories are going to look different. And so I think that that's one of the things that that we can learn, even, you know, as your own family you know, had a totally different symptoms and how that journey looked. But also just along with kindness, I think there's something very intentional. You know, God created the Sabbath in the course of creation. And I think that this is an opportunity. While the virus is bad, there's an opportunity to take inventory of what is important in life, and being intentional to create Sabbaths and seasons of Sabbath in our routine and in our lives, because there are really great lessons that we can learn as we slow down and as we value what's important. And then finally, just recognizing, you know, God is the giver of life. And isn't it incredible to just be reminded that even in the midst of fear and not being able to breathe, because I think that would be one of the most terrifying experiences to feel, but just to recognize that God is the one who gives us life, gives us breath.
Yes.
He's already determined and knows the number of our days. And so to be able to rest in those promises and to have that peace, I think these are really amazing opportunities that we as believers have to share with those around us who are living the life in fear. So I keep having this picture of you struggling to breathe. Is that so many people are just living their lives?
Yeah.
Not physically, but metaphorically. So yeah, do you have any wisdom that you can share with us on just how we can navigate these lessons?
Well, hopefully you don't have to go through it personally, like me. You know, I wouldn't wish this on anyone. Honestly, it's been pretty awful. And there is a reason why they've shut down the globe. You know, it's not a political thing or anything like that. It's a real thing. You know, I think dealing with the fear, really saying, God, where is there fear in me? Where do I don't trust you? And can I trust you if I got ill? Not asking or speaking that, or, you know, anything. I believe we can ask for protection and all that, but end of the day, we just don't know. You know? And so where do I not trust you? With my kids, with my, like for me, even like my relatives who are in Houston, a big hot spot, you know, or my mom, I mean, where we've got like high risk, you know, we don't know if this like a whole lingering symptom is genetic. They just don't know. And I'm like, my siblings, you know? And so it's like, I have to trust. And one thing is my husband, which I'm so proud of my husband, he had his, he sought out spiritual directors, which is kind of what they call it here, you know, almost like an older man, and just to be able to process this. And one thing that he started doing is he got a bunch of rocks, and it was all the things he can't control. And he wrote out things on those, and he put them in a jar, and for weeks, he would take a little time, a little ritual, and he'd pull them out and he'd put them before God. And he's like, I can't control my wife's health. I can't control my mom and my sister who are in Houston and high risk. I can't, you know, it's like, we can't control. And it doesn't matter how strong you are of a Christian, this button will be pushed. It will, you know. I think another thing that I started doing, and my friend Annie Kate, I believe, sent it to me, who is going to be speaking from her. Amy Grant, way back, you know, old Amy Grant, she actually released this thing on a stillness practice, you know. So, and it was really helpful, because it was basically her being, and it's on Facebook if you want to look up stillness practice with Amy Grant. This is like a real recent thing she did. And basically it was her being just gut level honest and talking to God, you know, but then getting before him and saying, but I'm loved, you know, I'm loved. And I actually took it a step further, and I just took several Psalms and I had about God's love, and I just pulled out words like cherishing love, nourishing love, surrounding love, you know, all these. And I took him, I was like, all right, God, I need your nourishing love right now, because I'm just starving for you, because I'm so broken right now with this illness, you know, and tragedy and junk, all kinds of stuff going on, this chaos. So I need you, you know, and I have to keep going back to that, you know, and so there's just so many things. But like I said, I think we can come back to, despite trauma, despite being this is so awful, I still can have the perspective that God can meet me in the middle of it and teach me and show me and grow me and mature me, you know, even in the midst of pain. In fact, this is probably the best place to do it, is in the midst of pain and trauma. And yeah, and like I said, and get help where you need to get help. It is okay. In fact, I encourage it, actually. And in our groups, we have a lot. I mean, we've had people who are suicidal. We've had all kinds of stuff. And we're like, get outside help, get, you know, professional help if you need it, because this is an intense time, and it's okay, you know. So
we're almost out of time, but we'll try to get to these last couple of questions. But is there anything that you would say, other than what we've heard just in the media, as far as symptoms that we should be aware of, and how it sounds like that even in your own family, there were a variety of symptoms. So what should we be looking for, or just if we're feeling something, of not being paranoid of like, oh my gosh, you know, do I have it? But just, you know, what are some of the symptoms maybe that either the media hasn't highlighted or that you have seen even in Europe, that may be less talked about? So, and
yeah,
if
so
any other questions, we'll try to get to those. Go ahead and keep typing those in. But
great. I think key question is actually can look really diverse. And I think if you don't feel well, I would treat it like you have it and try to get a test if you can, within 3 to 5 days. Because after that, like I said, there's a lot of false negatives, and we've seen that in our groups. But you can have everything from a rash, like especially kids get rashes, like all kinds of rashes, not just one type. There's all kinds. You know, just feeling funky and a little achy. We've had a lot of people with GI issues. I never had that, but there's kind of a whole strain. If you Google, there's some new articles about 6 different types of COVID. It's the same COVID, but it's kind of manifesting. It's not definitive. It's actually kind of pick and mix a little bit on some of it. Like I had some symptoms here and some symptoms there, but like there's a whole strain where people are just on GI issues and diarrhea and that kind of thing. But then there's also heart issues, so racing hearts and just that kind of thing. Loss of taste and smell. I never had that, actually. But some people, that's all they get, which is odd. And you know, but then there's later on symptoms, like people are having hair loss, people are having you know, like pink eye is another one. So honestly, the list is pretty long. And so, you know, one, don't live in fear. It could just be a minor cold. It really could. But at the same time, if you have access to testing, I would just have caution and try to go get tested as soon as possible. So yeah, there's a really long list, really long list. So it's not just your typical, you don't have to have a fever. That's one thing to really note. You could just feel a bit achy, you know, a little bit of a sore throat. You don't have to have a cough. I had a lot of people who did cough. Yeah, so.
Which is really important, I think, also just to recognize that I mean, you're listing some things that we would assume would be very common, whether it's pink eye or like, you know, an upset stomach or things like that, that we wouldn't even think twice of being correlated with COVID. And then also an interesting point I think you pointed out is not always having a fever, and yet that's one of the things that we're basing a safe
government
person,
guidelines,
person, right?
Yeah.
And So just being really cognizant of, that there's a lot of things that we really don't know and don't understand. And then also just the long-term effects of what this looks like, even if you have mild symptoms, will it manifest itself in other ways down the road? So
yeah, it's a serious virus. I think, like I said, it's the balance of don't be afraid, but test, don't guess. That's what we say in the health and wellness world, test, don't guess. And so if you have access to testing, just be on the safe side, just go do it, even if it seems minor, because, best case is just a cold. Do
you have any recommendations though, whenever there are so many false negatives? And so you take the, test, don't guess, but then if it's false, and then do you have any comments or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think they're getting more and more reports out that that's happening. At least here in the UK, it's not a big deal, honestly, because testing was so inaccessible. And so they were like, basically, if you have anything, you have it. So they're like, quarantine for 14 days. That's what they said. They're like, if you have anything, pretty much. In the States, I think it's probably different. I don't know all the guidelines and that kind of thing. And so, like I said, try to do a window of 3 to 5 days if you can test. Before 3 days, could be negative. After 3 days, and even in that, could still be negative. I think, honestly, if your family's ill, if you're ill, I know it's hard, but try to quarantine in the guidelines, even if you don't feel terrible. Like my husband, honestly, normally he would have just pushed through and gone to work. He really would have taken some medicine, flu medicine, just gone to work, but he had COVID. So, it's a really strange beast. It really is. And hopefully if you get it, you're over it in 5 days or 10 days, a lot of people are, and that's great. But I think it's just not giving it to other people. You just don't know. And so I think if you continue after 14 days and you've had negative tests, that's probably, it might be COVID, and so we're still trying to figure it out, the medical community. I mean, I'm getting to see all kinds of articles and research and all the new stuff. Bottom line, they still don't know. They still don't have the answers. And I think, and honestly, if you pray and you're like, God, is this COVID? And you feel like, then treat it like COVID and just seek to get better and get rest. And so I don't know if that helps at all.
No, I think that's great. I mean, I know that you don't have all the answers, but you have walked through this personally, and I think that there's something to learn from that, just from your personal experience. And as we're just wrapping up, because we are literally almost out of time, do you have any closing words or remarks that you would like to share?
Yeah, I think the phrase that always comes to mind in this whole thing, and I'm kind of into a certain translation of the Bible these days, and the phrase is wraparound presence, and I think that's my biggest prayer, that in the midst of, if we're Christians, that we would experience this wraparound presence in our family, for me, and and that's gonna be our biggest protection. That's gonna be our biggest against fear of the unknown. There's a lot of unknowns. There are, and we're not going to have answers, and that's okay if we have his presence. So I think that would be my final thought.
I think that's so good. And just to capitalize on that, I think just recognizing that our times are in his hands, our days are numbered. And as Job says, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He is sovereign. He sits on the throne, and he's good all the time. And he is good in the midst of COVID-19. Amen.
Yes, he is.
Well, thank you, Jeannie. Thank you to our audience members. And we just thank you for sharing your story. Thank you, audience, for joining us. And Jeannie, we just pray blessings over your family, that you continue to heal. And we are so grateful that you took this time just to share your story and your personal account. And may we all continue just to be a light and a hope, pointing people to Jesus during this dark season that the world is facing. So thank you.
Thank you.